have been in the church for a pretty long time, and you might have remembered Bishop Jeff Barrow. Some of us remember him. He once said to me, "I bet you look like a hot mess when you're running." That's a wonderful thing for your bishop to say to you. But if you ever are unfortunate enough to see me running around Milwaukee when I'm training, especially for a marathon or something, you might agree. Because I dress for the weather, not for style. If things don't match, I don't care. If I got stripes going one way and going the other way, it does not matter. I have my phone with me, obviously. I have a water bottle. I carry packets of applesauce and Fig Newton bars because I can't, once I'm running, if my stomach gets empty, it's terrible. I carry sunscreen and tissues. So I have a lot of stuff on me. That's bad enough, but if to see me running backwards with all that, now that would be a sight. And I see already some looks of, what? Don't you run backwards?
Oh, I thought it was just common.
Oh, did you? Yeah, no. How about you guys? Do you guys run? No, some of us runners? Actually, it is a thing. It is a thing. The hashtag running backwards has 1.2 million views on TikTok. Reverse running, 112,000. Backward running, 100-some thousand. TikTokers, including Antonio Lion of God Gillespie, who's a certified fitness trainer and founder of Pro Longevity Fitness, are hyping the benefits of reversing your run. He says, the longest I run backwards is 8 miles.
Oh my goodness.
Wow. Now, I'm wondering if that's on a treadmill. You might have seen, if you go to a gym, you might have seen occasionally folks on a treadmill. Okay. But the idea is that when you're running backwards, you're using different muscles. And therefore, training is better. There's recovery benefits for your muscles. And actually, it's less stress on your knees. So there's good for running backwards. So what some people are doing physically, I think many of us have a tendency to do in our lives. Maybe not literally, but definitely figuratively, and that is to look backwards, to be looking backwards. And that's one of the things that we are actually both doing, I'm getting all meta here, and seeing with our text for today. First of all, we can admit that we are looking at texts and stories from thousands of years ago. That's pretty far looking backwards, right? We are looking at texts from thousands of years ago for a word for our life today. Now, with that acknowledgement out of the way, let's look at that text from the prophet Jeremiah. And a little background perspective. Well, maybe it's not necessary, it could certainly be helpful. These words were spoken, written to the people of God who had been taken into exile in Babylon some 600 years before Jesus. So exile is it's kind of like being hostages. We've heard a lot about hostages. So these were people taken away as hostages about 600 years before Jesus was born. These verses, they actually follow, I'm looking backward even more, they follow verses that assert that God was the one who orchestrated the conquest, the destruction of their country, because the people had strayed from God's way. Now, that whole kind of attributing control of everyday events, major world events, to God could be fodder for a whole other sermon. I'll mark it down. But what we get actually in our words for today is the corollary. If God sent the people into exile, then God can certainly bring them back. And that's the word that we get in our passage for today. This kind of backward thinking looks for and longs for a return, a redo. And it is hopeful. On top of that, the prophet Jeremiah declares that God's going to reestablish, return, go back to a leader of the branch of the family of David. Now this is again looking even farther back. That David was a king hundreds of years farther back in their stories. And this person would lead the people in lives of righteousness, meaning right relationship to God and one another. You can't do one without the other. And justice. Sounds great, right? We look back, we're looking for that leader to help us, pull us in the right direction. If we could just go back and do that one-time do-over. Except when we look backwards, we tend to do so not with the actual 2020 hindsight, hindsight's 2020. That's seldom actually what it is. I would almost say it's 2040 or something, because often when we look backwards, we look for what we want to see and not for all of the reality. Because if we're honest, and now, I'm bringing up texts that aren't assigned for today, but some of us remember the stories of King David that the prophet's looking to. Great leader, great army. Yeah, except for he sends his troops out to go fight a war. Well, he stays in Jerusalem at least one time, probably sexually assaulting Bathsheba, and then having her husband killed when she gets pregnant, just to name one inglorious episode. Oh, let's get David back. Let's get a ruler just like him. No, let's not. Yeah, no. But that's what we often tend to do. It's what so many politicians, pundits, and preachers do. We look back to better days, don't we? To the 1950s, right? Let's make America great again. When the 50s, when women stayed home, when there were far fewer divorces and everybody went to church. Remember those good old days? When folks moved to the suburbs, the good old days. Just wish we could go back. But if we do truly and honestly look back, what else would we see? You can answer here. What else would you see? Blatant, according to the law, the Jim Crow laws in the South. Our wonderful redlining, wonderful things that we did up here north to, encourage people to move out to the suburbs and not allow any improvements on the city, thus making, slums. What else? Other things.
I remember at my church I went to growing up was full, and every third sermon was about how the women's hemlines were going too far up.
Oh my goodness! I would agree sometimes, but no.
That must have been a winner.
Yeah. So women's rights weren't very much. Yeah, women were limited to certain professions, often trapped in abusive relationships. Well, I saw is there a finger point? Yes.
And if you were gay, you couldn't say it.
Right. Men and women, and of course that's all there were. Men and women, there were only two. They had to live heteronormative lives, no room for the complexity of sexuality or gender, just to name a few of the not so good in the good old days. That's one of the problems with looking backwards. You don't really see accurately. We don't see accurately what we see behind us, and we definitely don't see what we're in and what we're facing. So we look to what we want, but not to the truth. So, and I just kind of gave it away. What's another problem with running or looking backwards, literally, not just figuratively? Whiplash, yeah. Yeah, if you fall or you're trying to see. You can't see what's in front of you, obviously. You can't see where you're going. Trying to deal with the realities of now, but with the eyes and the mindset of the past, doesn't work. So when Jesus questions the disciples about who are people thinking and saying that he is, their answers are Elijah. That's a prophet from a long time ago. That's the distant past. Others say John the Baptist. Well, that's more recent, but still. When he questions the disciples about who are they saying he is, Peter actually doesn't really do much better. The text as we have it seems to think that's what we're going to get. He pulls out, he says, "You're the Messiah, the one anointed from God. You are the one to do God's will." And unfortunately, that's where our reading stops. It stops with Peter dropping that name. You're the Messiah. That's not the end of the episode. You know, we're so used to our episodes and streaming and all that kind of stuff. It's not the end of the story or the scene. By chance, would anyone, besides the members of the Zoom Bible study, Beth or Vicky, as clergy folks, might anyone know what kind of comes next? This is a tough sermon. You're having to do a lot of work. I'm making you think. It's like a test. Oh, I'm sorry, Carol, I forgot you. I forgot, I'm sorry, as another clergy. Yes. And Bob. All right, so all of this has been to give you all time to think. This is all planned out. So what comes next? Okay, anybody can answer, I don't care. We want to move it
Don't tell
along.
anybody who I am.
Yeah, yes, that a good one. That is, don't tell anybody who I am, that I am the Messiah. Yes.
I'm gonna die, they're gonna put me up on a cross, it's gonna be awful.
Yeah. Basically what comes next is Jesus saying, okay, good, you got the Messiah right, but guess what? I'm going to be tortured, arrested, executed, and then I'm going to rise. But, basically, I'm not going to do what you want me to do. The Messiah is not going to do what you think, as in kicking out the Romans, restoring us to some glorious, mythical king and country. That's not the Messiah that Jesus will be or is. Jesus is going to be suffering and executed. In other words, by any standard, he and his movement is not actually going to succeed. That's how we think. We don't usually like your leader to be arrested and executed. What you're going to want to happen isn't, I'm going to be a failure, really. Jesus is a failure if all we're doing is looking backward at the way it's been done. If all we want is a return to some fabled, falsely comfortable past, Jesus says to Peter and to the disciples and to us today, don't just look backwards. Turn around, look at where you are right now. Deal with the world that we are in by looking to what God is calling us to be, because we're not just a bunch of has-beens. We're not. You're not a bunch of has-beens. And I think this is the word for us as the church. This is the word for us in our lives, in our relationships, in how we deal with ourselves. Yes, it's good to know our past, good to know your history, your baggage, but remember it faithfully, factually, And don't just look to what you've done before to get you through what you're going through now. Because if you just look backwards, you can trip and fall back again into unhealthy relationships, to unhealthy patterns. So that's one of the gifts of Advent. These weeks are not just about looking backwards to some mythical Christmas, but to God's love coming right now. Because that's what God is doing. God's been doing it, and God is still and promises to continue into the future to bring God's love to birth in us. So that we know each and every day, no matter what is in our past, no matter what is in our past, no matter what is happening in our present or future, God's love is here. Look for it. God's love is backwards. God's love is upwards. It's downwards. And it's definitely forwards. Amen.